The lunch crowd at Birchwood Family Diner in Hamilton had thinned out by the time Caleb Whitmore noticed the man in the navy overcoat snap his fingers at the woman refilling his water glass. Caleb had spent 11 years working construction sites across southern Ontario, and there was a particular silence men carried right before they decided to hurt someone smaller than them. He recognized it now, watching the man's jaw tighten as the server's hand trembled just slightly while she set down his plate. Across the booth, Caleb's 6-year-old daughter, Ruby, was stacking sugar packets into a wobbly tower, humming to herself, unaware that the air in the room had changed. The plate hit the table too hard. Coffee sloshed over the rim of the man's cup and onto his sleeve. "Is competence really this difficult to find?" the man said, not quite a question, loud enough that 3 other tables turned to look. The server, young, maybe mid-20s, dark hair pulled back under a cap that read Birchwood, apologized quietly and reached for a napkin. He didn't let her. He grabbed her wrist instead, hard enough that she winced. Ruby stopped humming. Caleb was already standing before he'd decided to stand. The old instinct from years of being the guy who stepped between people surfacing before thought caught up to it. He crossed the diner in 4 strides and put himself between the man and the server, close enough that the man had to look up. "Let go of her," Caleb said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The man straightened, recalibrating the way people did when they weren't used to being interrupted. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "No," Caleb said, "but I know what you just did." For a second, nobody in the diner moved. Then the server looked up. Past the fear, there was something else in her face, something measured and sharp that didn't belong to a person who'd spent her whole life carrying trays. And whatever this moment was, Caleb understood, somewhere underneath the noise of his own pulse, that it was only the beginning of something much bigger than a spilled cup of coffee. The man's name was Desmond Holloway, and his laugh, short, dismissive, didn't leave the room even after he stopped making it. It hung there the way oil hangs on water, and the other customers lowered their eyes to their plates the way people do when they've decided not to get involved. Desmond adjusted the cuff of his coat and looked Caleb over slowly. Work boots, the faded flannel, the calluses on his knuckles, cataloging him the way men like Desmond cataloged everyone, sorting the world into people who mattered and people who didn't. "You should sit back down," Desmond said, quieter now, which made it worse, "before you cause a problem you can't afford." Caleb didn't move. Behind him, the server hadn't moved either. Coffee dripped steadily off the table onto the floor. Ruby sat frozen in the booth, both hands wrapped around the edge of the table, watching her father with the particular stillness of a child who has just learned something about the world she didn't want to learn yet. "The only problem here," Caleb said, "is you thinking your money buys you the right to grab people." A teenage busser near the kitchen quietly lifted his phone and started filming. Desmond noticed and didn't care, the way men who'd never been filmed and made to answer for it usually didn't. He took a step closer, close enough that Caleb could smell the cologne, and said, "Do you know who I am?" "A man yelling at someone who can't yell back," Caleb said. Something in Desmond's face went cold. "I manage 14 commercial properties in this region. This diner stays open because my firm hasn't decided to make it not worth their while." The owner, a heavy-set man named Royce, who'd been wiping down the counter, hurried over with his hands raised. "Mr. Holloway, please, there's no need." Desmond cut him off without even turning his head. "Then maybe your staff should learn whose patience they're spending." The server spoke for the first time, her voice low and steady. "Sir," I apologized, "I'll bring you a new plate." Desmond looked at her like she'd said something offensive simply by existing. "What you'll do is learn there are consequences for wasting my time." He reached for the name badge pinned to her apron, the way a man reaches for something he believes already belongs to him. And Caleb's hand closed around his wrist before it got there. It happened fast enough that half the diner gasped before they understood what they'd seen. Desmond froze, less from the grip than from the fact that someone had dared put a hand on him at all. Caleb didn't squeeze, he didn't need to. "I said let go," he repeated. "Now it's your turn to learn something." Desmond's composure cracked for half a second before he buried it. He looked down at Caleb's hand, then back up. "You have no idea what you just started." Caleb released him and stepped back, just enough to show restraint, not retreat. Royce hovered, sweating. "Caleb, please. Take Ruby home, I'll handle the rest." But Desmond was already pulling out his phone. "No," he said. "We'll handle all of it." He dialed, turned slightly, voice pitched to Carrie. "Patrick, cancel the maintenance contract with Whitmore site work, effective today." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What?" Desmond ended the call, almost amused now. "You service 2 of our regional properties, don't you?" "Not anymore." Ruby slid out of the booth. "Dad? Those 2 contracts were nearly half of what kept the lights on in Caleb's house." Royce looked sick. "Desmond, that's not necessary. Everything is necessary when people forget their place. Desmond turned to point at Caleb like he was passing sentence. By tomorrow, every contractor in this county will know exactly why they should think twice before hiring you. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he refused to let Desmond see what those words had done. The server's eyes moved to him then, searching his face with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was calculation, observation, like she was filing every word away for later. Desmond leaned in one last time. Men like you think courage is worth something because you've got nothing else to bargain with. Courage doesn't pay a mortgage. He turned and walked out, polished shoes stepping carefully around the broken porcelain like the mess should part for him. At the door, he paused beside Royce. Fire her by morning or your lease review happens next month instead of next year. Then he was gone, the bell over the door ringing cheerfully into the silence he left behind. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then the diner exhaled all at once into anxious murmurs. Royce pressed both hands to his face. The server knelt to gather the broken plate herself, and Caleb knelt beside her without being asked, helping her collect the pieces. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "Neither did you," Caleb answered. Up close, her hands were steady, almost elegant, not the hands he'd expect on someone who carried trays for a living, except for a thin old burn scar along one wrist. Royce came over, ashamed. "Maya, I'm so sorry about this." Caleb looked up. Maya. The name fit oddly against the badge stitched with a different name, Hannah. She gave Royce a look that quieted him instantly, and he said nothing more about it. Ruby walked over and handed the woman a napkin with great seriousness. "You shouldn't cry just because he was mean." Maya blinked, surprised, then smiled, the first real one Caleb had seen on her. "I wasn't planning to." "Good," Ruby said. "My dad gets mad when people are mean to other people." That almost made Caleb laugh despite the knot sitting in his chest. Royce cleared his throat. "Caleb, about those contracts, just say it." Desmond holds half the commercial leases on this strip. When he calls people, they listen. Caleb nodded once. He'd expected nothing less. Maya stood, the tray forgotten on the table. "This happened because of me." "It happened because men like him think nobody pushes back," Caleb said. She studied him for a moment. "Still, I'm sorry." Caleb glanced toward Ruby, then out at the rain starting against the window. "Sorry doesn't cover groceries." He regretted it the second he said it, watching something shift in her face. Not offended, just thoughtful, like the truth of it had landed somewhere quiet. Royce stepped in. "Dinner's on the house tonight." Ruby tugged Caleb's sleeve. "Can we still get pie?" The plainness of the question cracked the tension just enough that Royce managed a small laugh. "Yes, pie too." 10 minutes later, while Ruby ate her pie and the diner slowly settled back into its usual hum, Caleb's phone buzzed 3 times in a row. First, contract suspended pending review. Second, tomorrow's job canceled. Third, from a number he didn't recognize. "We heard about tonight. Don't call again." He stared at the screen, a pulse hammering in his neck. Across the diner, Maya watched the change in his face. "Already? He works fast when he's punishing someone," Caleb said, sliding the phone into his pocket. Maya folded a towel slowly, her expression unreadable. "Then maybe he picked the wrong person to punish this time." Caleb looked at her, puzzled by the certainty in her voice. Before he could ask what she meant, another customer approached, holding up his phone. "You should probably see this." Someone had posted the video already. Caleb watched himself standing between Desmond and Maya, Ruby visible in the booth behind him, the caption already spreading underneath. "Local contractor confronts executive in diner altercation." The comments were multiplying by the minute, some calling him a hero, others calling him a problem. Caleb handed the phone back without a word, but inside something told him the night wasn't ending here, it was only starting. Outside, a dark sedan sat parked across the street longer than it needed to, engine idling unnoticed by most of the customers. Maya saw it through the rain-streaked glass, and her expression changed, almost too subtly to catch. She peeled the false name tag off her apron and slipped it into her pocket. Caleb noticed. "Hannah?" She met his eyes a beat too long before answering. "Temporary name. Why bother? Because sometimes a disguise tells you more truth than your own name does." The sedan's headlights brightened across the street, and Maya understood with a quiet certainty that Desmond had already made another call, one that had nothing to do with dinner, and everything to do with the war Caleb Whitmore had just walked into without knowing whose it was. Caleb barely slept that night. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the quiet inside his small rented house in the East End felt heavier than the storm had. The kitchen table was covered in unpaid bills, one of Ruby's school drawings, and the battered notebook where he still logged every job by hand because the apps never worked when it mattered. At 6:10, before he'd even finished the coffee, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Okafor, who ran the bakery he serviced every second Thursday. Her voice was apologetic before she said a word, which told him everything. Caleb, I'm sorry, my landlord called before sunrise. Said if I keep using you, my lease inspection moves up. Caleb leaned a hand on the counter and looked at the cracked tile. You don't have to explain, you're a good person. Good doesn't fix a walk-in freezer, she said quietly, and hung up before the kindness could become harder to hold than the loss. By 7:30, 3 more cancellations had come in. By 8, the diner video had crossed onto local news pages, the headline shifting already, from contractor to confrontation. Hamilton man's outburst caught on camera. Someone had dug up an old photo of him in a hard hat, an article about a workplace injury years back. By 9, the comments had turned uglier. Anger issues. Another guy who can't control himself. Where was security? He turned the phone face down when Ruby came into the kitchen in her school uniform, backpack hanging off one shoulder. Are we okay? She asked, because kids always know when adults are about to lie to them before breakfast is even on the table. Caleb forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We're still standing. Ruby studied him. That means no. Before he could answer, a black SUV slowed outside the house, idled for 3 seconds, then pulled away. Caleb noticed the tinted windows and said nothing, but some old part of him filed it away anyway. After dropping Ruby at school, he drove to his first remaining job across town and found the gate padlocked, a printed notice zip-tied to the fence. Contract terminated. No signature, no explanation. He crumpled it in one fist and turned when another car rolled into the lot. A silver sedan he recognized from the diner. Maya stepped out in dark jeans and a plain beige coat, sunglasses on, looking nothing like the woman from the night before except for the same careful stillness in how she carried herself. You tracked down my address? Caleb asked, irritation arriving before gratitude had a chance to. She took off the sunglasses. Your truck has your business name painted on the door, so. More apologies? No, she said. A warning. I've had enough warnings for one morning. She glanced down the empty street before she spoke. Desmond doesn't stop after humiliating someone. He keeps going until people either fold or disappear from his way. Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. Noticed. The SUV outside your house? His jaw tightened. That was him? Security contractors he uses when he wants to make a point without leaving fingerprints. Caleb stepped closer. Who are you, really? She looked at the termination notice still crumpled in his hand instead of answering directly. How many contracts did you lose this morning? 6. And probably more by noon. You talk like you know his schedule, I know his methods. Then tell me why a server knows corporate intimidation tactics. Before she could answer, a pickup truck pulled into the lot behind them. 2 men stepped out wearing company jackets Caleb recognized, compliance officers from Sterling Group, the parent company that owned half the commercial kitchens he serviced. One carried a clipboard, the other already had his phone up, recording. Caleb Whitmore, the older one asked. What now? We received a report of aggressive conduct toward a senior executive last night. Caleb laughed once, sharp with disbelief. Aggressive, we need your signature confirming you understand future contact with Sterling-managed properties may result in trespassing charges. Maya's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet. Caleb didn't take the paper. He grabbed her wrist. The man glanced at Maya as if she were furniture. The employee involved filed no complaint. Caleb turned to her sharply. Employee? She said nothing. The younger officer finally looked at her properly and froze just for a half second, but Caleb caught it, recognition, something close to fear. The older one noticed a beat too late, miss, he started. Maya raised one hand and her voice changed entirely when she spoke. Colder, sharper, every trace of softness from the diner gone. Continue. Both men straightened like they'd been pulled by a string. The older one swallowed. We were instructed by Desmond to Claire. No. Maya cut him off before he finished the name, her own name, and stepped forward, removing her sunglasses fully and looking at them with an authority that landed like a physical thing. Tell Mr. Holloway that using compliance staff for personal retaliation violates 3 internal conduct policies and 1 labor agreement he signed himself. Both men went pale. The younger one lowered his phone instantly. Yes, ma'am. Caleb looked between them. Ma'am? Maya's eyes stayed on the officers. Leave. They left without another word, and the silence after felt louder than the confrontation had. Caleb stared at her. Who are you this time, she answered. Makya Ferris. The name landed a second later because everyone in the region knew the Ferris name, hotels, restaurant groups, half the new development going up along the waterfront. Caleb's face shifted from suspicion to disbelief. Ferris? As in, she nodded once. Chief Executive Officer, Ferris Hospitality Group. Caleb actually stepped back. You're joking, I wish I were. I was pouring coffee at Birchwood because Birchwood is one of 41 local businesses operating under franchise pressure from my company, and there were internal reports of executive abuse at this regional level. Caleb stared at her like he was replaying the entire night through a completely different lens. So Desmond didn't know. He knew there was an audit happening. He didn't know I was the one running it. Caleb laughed once, humorless, and I stepped between a CEO and her own executive thinking I was protecting a waitress. You were protecting someone powerless in that moment, Maya said. That's what mattered. His anger surfaced fully now. Does it? Because right now my business is bleeding out and my daughter still needs her rent money paid while your board probably discusses damage control over breakfast. She took the hit without flinching. That's why I came before noon. Why noon? Because Desmond's already scheduled a press response. Caleb's phone buzzed as she said it. She glanced at it but said nothing. He opened it, a local alert. Ferris Hospitality Executive Claims Contractor made threats during alcohol-fueled incident. Caleb looked up slowly. Alcohol. He's moving faster than I expected, Maya said quietly. He's building a narrative before I can stop it. Caleb folded the phone shut. And where exactly do I fit into your corporate war? Her answer, when it came, was low and honest for the first time. You weren't supposed to. Before he could respond, another car pulled up fast, black, expensive, deliberate. Desmond stepped out, coat immaculate, smile restored, as if the night before had simply been theater under his direction. Well, he said, looking between them, then down at the termination notice on the ground. This is disappointing. Caleb moved half a step forward instinctively. Maya raised one hand without looking at him. Desmond ignored it. Maya, if secrecy was the plan, maybe don't reveal yourself in an industrial parking lot. Caleb looked at her sharply. Desmond turned to him amused, and you must feel special. A full executive escort this early. Caleb said nothing. Desmond adjusted his cuffs exactly the way he had the night before. Let me save everyone time. The board already has your audit summary, Maya. Half of them think your methods have damaged investor confidence more than any internal complaint ever could. Maya's face stayed unreadable. And half of them? Half are waiting to see whether your judgment includes protecting unstable men with public anger issues. Caleb stepped forward. Say unstable again. Desmond smiled wider. There it is. He looked at Maya. Cameras love this. Leave, Desmond, Maya said, voice sharpening. But he hadn't come to argue. He'd come to wound. By tonight, every parent at Ruby Whitmore's school will know her father threatened a corporate executive in front of a child. Caleb went still. Maya's face hardened instantly. You used school records, Desmond shrugged. Public enough, when contracts overlap with county donors. That was the moment Caleb's restraint nearly broke. Not from the insult, but because Desmond had said his daughter's name. Maya stepped between them before the distance closed entirely, her voice dropping into something dangerous enough that even Desmond recalculated. If you drag his daughter into this again, I will personally sign the criminal referral myself. Desmond studied her for a long moment, then smiled with that same polished poison. Then maybe you should decide whether he's worth the board seat you're about to lose. He returned to his car and left, tires fading down the empty street. Caleb exhaled hard. Maya stood watching the road long after the car had disappeared. Then she finally said what neither of them had wanted to say first. This stopped being about last night the moment he realized you weren't afraid of him. Caleb looked at her, anger tangled now with something heavier. Then tell me the truth. If I hadn't stood up in that diner, would you still have exposed him? Yes, she said. A pause. But not this fast. Caleb looked toward the school clock tower in the distance, already imagining whispers reaching Ruby before lunch. Congratulations, he said quietly. Your truth just moved into my house. By late afternoon, Caleb understood that public humiliation carried a different weight when it arrived quietly. Nobody shouted at him in the grocery store. Nobody confronted him on the street. People just looked twice, lowered their voices, pretended they hadn't recognized him from the morning's headlines. The news had looped the diner footage so many times that even the freeze frame they'd chosen felt deliberate. Caleb rigid, jaw tight. Desmond positioned to look calm and threatened. Someone had edited out the moment Desmond shoved the tray. Someone had muted the line about people staying stuck. What remained was a clean lie, polished enough for broadcast. He felt it most when he got to Ruby School early and saw two mothers near the gate glance at him, then drop their voices. Ruby came out holding her backpack against her chest, smiling until she saw his face. What happened? She asked quietly. Caleb crouched to her level. Remember how I told you some people tell stories that make them look good? She nodded. They're doing that? Yeah, she thought about it. Then why don't you tell yours louder? The simplicity of it nearly broke something open in his chest. He smiled despite himself, and the smile only faded when Maya's black sedan appeared across the street again. She stayed inside until Ruby had climbed into the truck, then stepped out holding a tablet and a folder thick with paper, looking less like the woman from the diner now, and entirely like someone who belonged behind boardroom glass. Hair pulled back, navy coat sharp against the fading light. "The board called an emergency meeting tonight," she said without preamble. Caleb crossed his arms. "And I'm supposed to care?" She handed him the tablet. On screen, a draft press release. Ferris Hospitality confirms its confidence in Regional Director Desmond Holloway, pending internal review. The company also condemns public threats against leadership personnel. Caleb read it twice. They're protecting him. Half the board thinks removing him now creates investor panic. The other half is waiting to see if I can prove he used company resources for intimidation before 6 tonight. Sounds like your problem. Maya didn't react right away. He submitted sealed disciplinary records from your military service file to one board member an hour ago. Caleb's expression changed completely. How would he even get that? Those records are sealed. He has leverage. He's framing you as unstable because fear makes a board obedient. She opened the folder, printed emails, security invoices, hidden lease manipulations, threats logged against small business owners. He's been doing this for years. I just couldn't prove it until now. Caleb stared at an old psychological evaluation visible beneath the other pages, private words he'd once said to a doctor years ago, now stripped of context and turned into ammunition. "He has no right. He has leverage," she repeated. "And tonight he plans to use your history as proof my judgment's compromised." Caleb looked toward Ruby in the truck, drawing fog circles on the window. "Then leave me out of it." He already made sure you can't be. Every instinct told him boardrooms destroyed men like him, that rooms like that wrote their conclusions before the witnesses even arrived. Then Ruby tapped the glass and held up her notebook. 3 crooked words written through the fog, "Tell yours louder." Caleb looked at it, then back at Maya. "If I go in there, I say exactly what I want to say. That's why I'm asking." By 6:20, the Ferris Tower glowed above downtown Hamilton like a different city entirely from the one Caleb knew. Glass, marble, silent elevators, reception desks polished enough to reflect his own hesitation back at him. He wore the only dark jacket he owned, the one from Ruby's school concert last winter, stiff at the shoulders but clean enough to pass. Maya walked beside him through the lobby while employees tried not to stare too openly. Some recognized her instantly. Others recognized him first from the news. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt longer than it should have. Caleb watched the numbers climb while Maya reviewed her notes in silence. Finally, he asked, "Why disguise yourself in a diner if you could have fired him with one email?" She didn't look up from the folder, because people hide the truth when they know someone important is watching. They show it when they think no one who matters is listening, and, "What did you hear?" She looked up only when the doors opened. Enough to know Desmond built a private empire inside mine. The boardroom doors stood open. 12 people sat around a long table dressed in the quiet, expensive way of people who didn't need to try, tablets open, counsel seated near each elbow. At the far end, Desmond lounged with one ankle crossed over his knee, like he was hosting the meeting rather than defending himself in it. He smiled when Caleb walked in exactly the way Caleb expected him to. "Well," Desmond said, loud enough for the whole table, "the guest star arrives." A few board members stiffened visibly. A woman near the center took off her glasses and murmured something to the man beside her. Maya didn't sit. Before anyone speaks, all unofficial press statements on this matter are suspended. A gray-haired man at the head of the table, the chairman, answered first. "Maya, that depends on whether tonight clarifies things or makes them worse." Desmond leaned back. "Exposure got worse the moment our CEO brought a civilian altercation into corporate governance." Caleb said nothing yet. He'd learned in harder rooms than this one that powerful people revealed themselves fastest when silence forced them to fill it. Maya connected her tablet to the screen. Documents appeared, lease manipulations, security payments, shell reimbursements, intimidation costs routed through maintenance accounts, all authorized under Desmond Holloway's name. He didn't blink. Necessary asset protection. Another document, a list of franchise owners pressured after filing complaints. Birchwood Diner was on it. So were a bakery, 2 cafes, an independent garage. Caleb recognized names from his own canceled contracts. 41 businesses threatened with lease acceleration after reporting labor abuse, Maya said. Desmond leaned forward. "Strategic enforcement isn't abuse." One board member frowned. "Did you authorize off-record surveillance of contractors?" Maya tapped again. Photos. Caleb's truck outside his house, Ruby walking into school, timestamps, billing codes traced to Desmond's office. The room shifted. Even legal counsel sat up straighter. Caleb felt his anger rise again, but this time every face at the table was watching Desmond instead of him. Desmond's expression hardened for the first time. Protective observation following a public incident. Of a child, Maya said. He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he turned to Caleb, choosing attack over defense. Would you like the board to read your post-service evaluations, Mr. Whitmore? Since transparency apparently matters now. Several heads turned toward Caleb. Maya cut in sharply. That file was obtained illegally. Desmond ignored her and slid the printed pages across the table anyway. Old psychological reviews. A note about anger management after his discharge. Caleb recognized the pages immediately. The worst months, the ones after the accident on the Sudbury site that had ended his career on the cruise. After the hospital corridors, after losing Naomi while he fought an insurance company that took 4 months too long to approve the treatment that might have saved her. A board member looked uneasy. Another muttered, "Why is this even here? Because our CEO's judgment is compromised," Desmond said smoothly, "if she's trusting a volatile man who's now central to a media scandal." The chairman finally looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Whitmore, if you're here, speak." Maya turned slightly and said nothing more. She'd promised him that space. Caleb stepped forward, palms flat against the polished table, uncomfortable in this room but suddenly steady, because there was one thing powerful people never expected. Plain speech without apology. "Yes," he said. "I had anger after I lost my crew job. I had nightmares for a while. I flinched at loud doors for almost 2 years. Silence held the room. Then my wife got sick. The insurance turned into paperwork. The paperwork turned into months. The months turned into a funeral I couldn't fully pay for." Desmond shifted, impatient, because Caleb wasn't collapsing under the weight of it the way he was supposed to. "So if you want to call me unstable because I stood up when a man grabbed someone weaker than him, fine. Just say the real part too, the part where your executive put his hand on a woman in public because he figured nobody would stop him." One board member lowered her eyes. Another quietly set Desmond's documents aside. "I didn't know Maya Ferris from a server," Caleb went on, voice level, which made it land harder. "I didn't know there was a camera. My daughter was in that booth. She watched a grown man humiliate someone because he thought his rank made it allowed." Desmond cut in. "And you physically threatened corporate leadership." Caleb turned to him fully. "No, I embarrassed a bully who expected obedience." Maya watched the table. The balance was shifting, and Desmond felt it too. He stood abruptly. "This is sentiment, not governance." Maya pressed one final key. Audio filled the room. Desmond's voice from the diner's security backup that Royce had quietly forwarded an hour earlier. Clear. Unedited. "Is competence really this difficult to find?" Then the shove, then the threat about the contracts. Nobody moved while it played. When it ended, the room felt colder. Desmond stared at the screen, then at Maya, understanding too late that the one witness he'd dismissed had recorded the exact moment he believed belonged only to him. The chairman removed his glasses slowly. "Desmond, did you retaliate against private contractors this morning?" Desmond tried once more. "Operational decisions, yes or no?" He looked around the table and saw finally what Caleb had recognized years before in rooms far harder than this one, the moment a room decides someone has become disposable. Maya spoke quietly, almost without emotion. "He also signed the healthcare contract withdrawal 9 years ago that pulled emergency coverage from the regional hospital partnership." Caleb looked at her sharply. She kept her eyes on Desmond, including the program that denied the rapid approval in your wife's case. The blow landed somewhere far deeper than anything before it. Caleb stared at Desmond as if the rest of the room had simply disappeared. "You signed that." Desmond said nothing. The chairman stood. "Security." The word ended everything. 2 officers entered almost immediately. Desmond looked around once, still trying to calculate an exit through authority that had already abandoned him. As they reached him, Caleb spoke one last time, not loud, but enough for the room to hold on to it. "Power doesn't build character," he said. "It just takes the mask off." Nobody answered because nobody could improve on it after what they'd just watched fall apart. Outside the boardroom's glass wall, Hamilton's lights spread out across the darkening skyline, and for the first time all day, Maya let herself take one slow breath, because the thing she'd spent months building toward had finally happened where it could no longer be buried. Desmond Holloway was escorted out without another word, but the silence he left behind sat heavier than any argument that had happened in that room. Nobody rushed to fill it. The board members, who had spent years protecting numbers, stared at the evidence still glowing on the screen as if seeing their own company for the first time without the polish covering the cracks. Maya stood near the head of the table, shoulders straight, though the exhaustion in her eyes had finally surfaced. The chairman cleared his throat and announced an emergency suspension of every contract tied to Desmond's office, a full audit of every intimidation complaint on record, and immediate protection for the affected business owners. Caleb's lips listened, but the room already felt far away. The only thought left in his head was Ruby, probably still awake at home because she never slept well when he came home late. When Maya stepped into the hallway a minute later, she found him by the window, hands in his pockets, looking down at the traffic crawling along the street below. "You were right," she said softly. He didn't turn right away. "About what? Some things cost more if you stay seated." That made him glance at her, and for the first time since the diner, neither of them felt the need to defend anything. She held out a folded envelope. "Royce asked me to give you this myself. Inside was a new service agreement. Ferris Hospitality, regional maintenance contract, 1 full year, guaranteed, signed personally by Maya." Caleb looked at it, then back at her. "You don't have to fix everything with a contract. I know. This one isn't charity. Royce sent over your work records from the last few years. Apparently people trust you more than they trust my own maintenance department." A small, tired, real smile finally touched his face. Later that night, Maya drove with him back to Birchwood. Royce had left the lights on, even though the sign read closed. Inside, Ruby sat in the same booth from the night before, half asleep, coloring with a box of broken crayons. The moment she saw Maya, she sat up straight. "So," Ruby asked seriously, "are you still a waitress, or are you the boss now?" Maya laughed softly, sliding into the booth across from her. "Tonight? Maybe both." Ruby considered that with great care, then pushed a crayon across the table like it settled the matter entirely. Caleb watched them from the counter while Royce poured fresh coffee in silence. Outside, the town was still talking. The news was still spinning its headlines, and tomorrow would bring problems that neither money nor courage could fix overnight. But inside the small diner, under warm yellow light and the smell of pie cooling near the register, the noise finally felt far away. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb didn't feel like he was bracing for the next blow. He just stood there, listening to Ruby laugh again, and somehow that sound mattered more than everything that had broken before it.